להשיג בודהיות כדי להועיל ליצורים הנודדים. בבודה, בדרמה ובקהילה העילאית אבקש מקלט עד להערה. באמצעות המצבורים של הקשבה לדרמה להשיג בודהיות כדי להועיל ליצורים הנודדים. For immeasurables, page 26 or 7 in 8 in English. לכל בעלי התודעה יזכו באושר ובגורמי האושר. לכל בעלי התודעה ייפרדו מסבל ומגורמי הסבל. לכל בעלי התודעה לעולם לא ייפרדו מאושר נטול כאב. לכל בעלי התודעה יפתחו את מידת ההשתוות ללא משוא פנים של היקשרות ושל סלידה. Outer Mandala. אדמה זו שוחה בקטורת, עטורה פרחים, עדויה בהר מרו, בארבע היבשות, בשמש ובירח. עולה בדמיוני כשדה בודה, ואותה אגישה לכם כמנחה. לו יהנו כל הנודדים משדה טהור זה. אידם גורו רטנה מנדלה כמירייתה ימי. We'll continue with reciting the Heart Sutra in Hebrew, page 30. סוטרת מהות החוכמה. It's page 3 in English. אשתחווה לשלוש האבנים היקרות הנעלות. כך שמעתי. פעם אחת ישב הבגוון בהר פסגת הנשר ברג'קריהה, יחד עם סנגה גדולה של נזירים בעלי הסמכה מלאה וסנגה גדולה של בודיסטווה. באותה העת היה הבגוון שקוע בעיצוב מדיטטיבי של מניית התופעות, הקרוי הבהרה מעמיקה. כמו כן, באותה עת התבונן הבודיסטווה מעסטווה, אריה אבלוקטשבר הרב העוצמה, במעשה המעמיק של שלמות החוכמה, והתבונן אף בחמשת המצרפים האלה כריקים מעצם טבעם. ואז מכוח הבודה אמר כך שריפוטרה הנכבד לבודיסטווה מעסטווה, אריה אבלוקטשבר הרב העוצמה. כיצד יתאמן אותו בן השושלת הרוצה לעסוק במעשה המעמיק של שלמות החוכמה? מי שאמר זאת, השיב כך הבודיסטווה מעסטווה אריה אבלוקטשבר הרב העוצמה לשריפוטרה הנכבד. שריפוטרה, בן השושלת או בת השושלת הרוצים לעסוק במעשה המעמיק של שלמות החוכמה, התבוננו כך. התבוננו עד תום אף בחמשת המצרפים האלה כריקים מעצם טבעם. החומר ריק, הריקות היא חומר, אין ריקות מלבד חומר, ואף אין חומר מלבד ריקות. כמו כן, תחושה, הבחנה, גורמים מורכבים ותודעה ריקים. שריפוטרה, כך כל התופעות הן ריקות, נטולות מאפיינים, לא נוצרות, לא פוסקות, נטולות זיהומים, מופרדות מזיהומים, ללא התמעטות, ללא התמלאות. שריפוטרה, לפיכך לריקות אין חומר, אין תחושה, אין הבחנה, אין גורמים מורכבים, אין תודעה. אין עין, אין אוזן, אין אף, אין לשון, אין גוף, אין תודעה מנטלית. אין חומר, אין צלילים, אין ריחות, אין טעמים, אין מושאי מישוש, אין תופעות. אין מרכיבי עין, אין מרכיבי תודעה מנטלית, ועד למרכיבי התודעה המנטלית העיקרית. אין בערות, אין הכחדת הבערות, ועד להזדקנות ומוות, ואף אין הכחדת הזדקנות ומוות. כמו כן, אין סבל, מקור, התפסקות ודרך. אין חוכמה נשגבת, אין השגה, ואף אין אי השגה. שריפוטרה, לפיכך משום שאין השגה, מסתמכים הבודיסטוות על שלמות החוכמה ושוהים בה. משום שבתודעתם אין מערפלים, אין בהם פחד. משחלפו כליל מעבר לשגוי, הם מגיעים לשלמות של החלוף מעבר לצער. כמו כן, בהסתמך על שלמות החוכמה, הגיעו כל הבודות השוכנים בשלושת הזמנים לבודיות שלמה לחלוטין, הערה השלמה בהחלט. לפיכך, מנטרת שלמות החוכמה, מנטרת הידיעה הכבירה, המנטרה שאין נעלה ממנה, המנטרה המשתווה למה שאין שווה לו, המנטרה המשכינה כליל שלווה בכל הסבל, משום שאינה שקרית, דשי אמיתית. מנטרת שלמות החוכמה נאמרת, תאייתה גתה גתה, פרה גתה, פרה סמה גתה, בודי סוהה. שריפוטרה, על הבודיסטווה מעסטווה להתאמן כך בשלמות החוכמה המעמיקה. ואז יצא הבגוון מהעיצוב המדיטטיבי הזה ונשא מילות שבח לבודיסטווה מעסטווה אריה אבלוקטשבר הרב העוצמה. טוב מאוד, טוב מאוד, בן השושלת זה כך, בן השושלת זה כך. יש לעסוק בשלמות החוכמה המעמיקה כפי שציינת, ותתגתות אף הם ישמחו בך. משהעניק הבגוון את אמרתו כך, סמכו שריפוטרה הנכבד, הבודיסטווה מעשתווה אריה ולוקטישבר רב העוצמה, הסובבים האלה כולם בצירוף הישויות השמימיות, בני האנוש הישויות השמימיות למחצה והגנדרבה ושיבחו את שאמר הבגוון.
Just go over a little bit what we talked about yesterday, to just repeat, because I see a lot of new faces, so to make sure you don't lose, you don't get lost in what we've been talking about. Did you have a chance to read this? Okay. Got it? Okay, good. That would be helpful if you're writing in advance. Let me just go over some of the things again. So basically we talked about emptiness and dependent arising. So seeing who you are, so I know many of you have an idea of what that means. Emptiness, lack of inherent existence, class dependent arising. So traditionally, we take an example and then look how this phenomenon exists. And as you're aware, it's so extremely important to understand how phenomena really exist, because the not understanding of how phenomena exist is responsible for all our problems. From a Buddhist perspective, it's not that we're not good people, that we're somehow intrinsically or, naturally bad. It's just that we don't perceive how phenomena really exist. There's a mind, a specific type of awareness that perceives phenomena diametrically opposed to how they actually exist. Okay, so that's called ignorance or misperception. And so to identify that misperception, well, we need to first go and see what is it that we misperceive. Because we don't perceive this truck to be non-existent, or we don't perceive a truck to exist and are therefore mistaken. We're not mistaken with regard this truck exists, it sits on my table, but we're mistaken with respect to a certain characteristic. So we take a specific object, the truck, you've heard already. It's actually traditionally the chariot, but chariot's not being used every day anymore. So then the car is the example they used in the writing, and eventually and ended up with the truck, which I can take apart. I've got my tools here. I'm going to start doing this while I talk. Okay, so the idea is basically that we have a sense of this truck, of this phenomenon, to exist out there. To exist, and there's a whole list of characteristics truly existent, existing from its own side, objectively out there, and they actually mean the same thing. So I don't know how clear this is in Hebrew. I mean, definitely in English, this is not the language we use in everyday kind of dealing with things. Oh, this is an intrinsic car or an intrinsic truck. We don't talk that way. But it doesn't mean, though we don't really talk in that way, nevertheless we perceive it that way. We perceive something to be out there, objectively, inherently, intrinsically, from its own side, independent of my mind, independent of phenomena. But this perception is very deep, it's not intellectual. That's the problem. Intellectually, if I ask all of you, well, is this car, is this truck, even before you heard about Buddhism, is this dependent on other phenomena? You will say yes. Okay? So that's the problem. The problem is that it's a very deep kind of perception that we're not even necessarily aware of. It may be subconscious at times. Sometimes when we have strong anger or attachment, then it kind of becomes more coarse. And it becomes more obvious. But it's very slippery, very hard to actually understand it or to become aware of that misperception. Anyway, but if we check, just with a calm kind of mind, how does this truck appear? How do I myself, how does the I appear to myself? What kind of sense of an I do I have? That the I, my essence, me. Okay? We check. We come to see that there is a sense that this exists out there, able to establish itself, independent of anything. It's just this independent entity, objectively there. Right? So if you just read the list of those different characteristics, it's basically just saying we have that sense of a certain characteristic, we just add to the object. We add to the object. And so therefore, we cannot perceive a truck and an inherently existent truck kind of separate, in a separate way. They're mixed. To us, the truck is the inherently existent truck. So truck and inherently existent truck are the same thing. That's why when I say, oh, I don't investigate the existence of the truck, I just investigate how the truck exists. It seems to be the same thing, because for us there's no difference. Truck is inherently existent truck. Okay? I is the inherently existent I, nothing else. It's mixed. And the way I like to identify the I, what has always helped me to identify that sense of a permanent I, well, we've been in here for about 13 minutes now. We were here before I came, so probably around 15, minutes. And there's a sense, if you think back from the moment you got in here, and you sat down, until now, if you think of the I, the awareness of me, it seems there's a permanent continuum, like a permanent thing that has been unchanging from the moment you came in until now. Despite the body changing moment by moment, the body changes moment by moment, or our thoughts have changed. The moment we sat down, we had different thoughts, different awarenesses. It's just been changing. The moment we sat down, it goes from one object to the next. Unless you have single-pointed concentration where you just focus on one object. But even then, the mind has been moving from one moment to the next, from one moment to the next. So there's that which we are made of, the ingredients, if you like, the parts that we're made of, our mind and body, they've been changing, but the I hasn't. There's a sense, the I got in, sat down, and there's this awareness of this me that's kind of permanent and solid. Well, that is the object we should identify. Okay? There's something inherently there, something intrinsic, independent, not changing. Everything else changes, that doesn't. And likewise with this truck, or objects we're attached to. There's a sense there's some intrinsic nature, some carness. Okay, carness. Or last night we said Michaeliyut. Michaeliyut, so there's some Michaelness. Okay? The wrongness. Miri, is that right? Yeah. Miriutness. Miriutness. There's miriut, there's an essence to miri. Okay? Something like that's the real Miri. When I look at Miri, I have a sense, it's not just her face, her gestures, her mind. It's like there's something separate from that, and that's her essence. Now that doesn't exist from a Buddhist perspective, and perceiving that to exist is our problem. Because we hold on to this. In our own case, we try to defend it at all costs. We try to defend it, gratify it. All day long we work for that. Our entire life is dedicated to this. Which doesn't exist. It doesn't even exist. We're craving, we're attached to something that has never existed. And we spend so much time and energy trying to gratify it. There's a mind, the mind that perceives that to exist, that exists. That mind exists. But the actual object doesn't. So we don't believe in the mind, we don't focus so much on the mind that perceives such a self. No, we perceive the self itself. That permanent self, that kind of inherently existent, ultimately existent self. That's what we perceive. And that's what we believe in. And the belief in that, it controls everything. It controls our everyday action. Does that make sense? Does that sound familiar? Yeah? What should I do today? What can I do to be happy? What has so-and-so done? They've done something to harm me. So right away we react with anger. They're better than myself. Jealousy. I'm better than them. Arrogance. Okay? There's always this kind of I, me, and mine. Okay, so the whole point of the exercise here is to understand that this doesn't exist. So I'll do this through a very traditional way of explaining emptiness. And there's so many different ways of tackling this. So many different ways because it's so hard to understand. And it's like one time you hear one time about it, it's unrealistic that you get a good understanding. I mean, it takes many, many, many years, many lifetimes, they say, to get an understanding of that. But we might as well start somewhere and then dig deeper every time we hear about it. So every time you hear about it, you probably get a better understanding. And it's like digging a hole in the ground. You get deeper and deeper and deeper. That's kind of the analogy. Understanding emptiness, you need to go very deep. It's a very deep understanding. And as I said, I'm going to stretch your mind. I'm going to stretch your mind, your brain, basically. That's the whole point of this exercise. So I said this last night, but for those of you who weren't here, so just for you to be prepared, I could have watered it down a little, but I thought, why water it down? I'm only here for a short time. You're only here for a short time. We only get together for a few days. Might as well go to the limit. To the limit of your understanding and the limit of my understanding, of course. And really cover as much as I can. So what I took here, the description here, this first description of emptiness and dependent arising, that's kind of a general to get you in the right kind of direction. And then everything that follows from that is based on Lama Tsongkhapa's text, illuminating the thought. It's called illuminating the thought. Oh, illuminating the intent. So I took some of the chapters in there, translated them, and shortened them, just made them shorter so in order for them to fit in here. But basically the ideas were all taken from this text. And so it's important to understand that we don't lose our understanding that we gain from emptiness and dependent arising. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then translate it into the true truth, or the true truth. So the true truth basically deal with how phenomena appear to us and how they actually exist. So phenomena appear to us in a way in which they don't exist. Okay? Phenomena appear to exist from their own side, inherently, at all times. So when I say, look at your mind, try to see what your mind perceives. Try to become aware. Look inwards at your own mind, how it perceives this truck to exist, able to establish itself from its own side. Look at the mind that perceives the eye. Become aware of that. So that appearance is with us at all times. Whatever we perceive, it seems like, I look at all of you, it's got nothing to do with my mind, the way I perceive it. You're out there. Exactly the way I perceive you, you're really out there. Okay? So whatever characteristic my mind describes you, well, that's the characteristic you seem to be having on from your own side. So that's how phenomena appear. But since they don't exist that way, since phenomena are subjective, they are they're dependent on perception and so forth, so therefore they exist in a different way in which they appear. There's a disparity of how they appear and how they exist. And the conventional truth deals with the way phenomena appear, and the ultimate truth deals with how phenomena really exist. Okay? So the true truth, conventional and ultimate, how they appear, how they actually exist. Okay, so let's just go quickly through the reasoning yesterday, just as a repetition. So as we've heard yesterday, if this truck really existed the way it appears, if myself really exists the way I appear to myself, or to my own mind, then I'm aware that this truck has parts. I have parts. I'm made of mind and body. Okay, this truck is made of, front, back, side, tires, and so forth. So if there's really some inherent truck, either this truck has to be one with its parts or separate from its parts. There is no other way. But either way, or whatever way I look at, it's impossible that, first of all, this inherently existent truck is different from its parts. Because if I take away the parts, I'm not left with a truck. Likewise with this eye, the eye that came in 20 minutes ago, so if that is really separate from my mind and body, I would be able to remove the mind, well, conceptually at least, if I conceptually removed mind this side, body on this side, I would be left with an eye. Okay? That's impossible. What would that be? You take away all the parts and you're still left with something? What would that be? Anyway, so doing it with the truck, doing it with the eye, it's impossible to have it separate. And anyway, we don't have a sense it's separate, because if I have a headache, if my head hurts, I say I have a headache. If they're really separate, if my eye was separate from mind and body, I could never say I'm sick when my part is sick. I could never say I walk when what walks is really my legs. My legs walk, and therefore I say I walk. Okay? If they were actually separate, if the I was separate from its parts, no way I could say anything about myself. But it doesn't seem that way. It seems as if I could basically separate the mind and body and still have that I there. Okay? I could identify the I. It seems that if I was able to really identify it, I could identify it totally separate from mind and body. Okay? So there's this contradiction there. I'm sick because my body is sick. Or I'm happy because my mind is happy. But then they're separate. If they're really separate, if my mind is happy, I don't have to be happy. If my body is sick, I don't have to be sick. Okay, they're totally separate, like a pea in a jar. Right? You have a jar and a pea inside. The pea is the I, and the jar is the mind and body. Right? And whatever happens with the jar has nothing to do with the pea. The jar is dirty, it doesn't mean the pea is dirty. Okay. So, if we do that investigation, it cannot be separate. Though it feels that way, it cannot be separate. Then the only other possibility is that it's one with its parts. It's the same. Either it's different or it's the same. Okay? It's different or other. Sorry, it's other or same. It's other than the parts, which we've just done, or it's the same with the parts. If it's the same with the parts, again we end up with a problem, because I have body and mind, I have all of those parts. So is it all of them, or is it just one? Or two? I mean, to just say it's some of them, for example with the truck, is the truck all of its parts, or just some of the parts? If I say it's some of the parts, I have a problem, because which part is it? Which part is exactly the truck? If I said the engine, then none of us would ever see the truck, because we don't see the engine, it's inside, right? Or if the tire breaks, we can't say the car breaks, because for the car to break, the engine has to break, because the car is the engine. Does that make sense? Okay, so to be just some parts, again, doesn't make sense, doesn't work. If it's all parts, if the truck is all parts, then for the truck to break, all parts have to break, right? I mean, you can't say just the engine is broken, therefore the car is broken. No, the truck is all parts, therefore everything has to break. Right? If I'm all my parts, if I'm my body and my mind, if I'm all my minds have to be unhappy if I'm unhappy. My body has to be unwell if I'm unwell, because I'm all of them. So I have to be mentally unwell and physically unwell in order to be unwell, because I'm all of those. Okay. Moreover, I have a sense there's one I, there's one I. I mean, talk about I, one shuni. There's one shuni sitting here. There's not many. But if she's got many parts, she ends up with many shunis. There's lots of shunis sitting here. Because there's the different body parts, there's the different minds, and they're all shuni. There's so many shunis. It gets fuller and fuller. The room really fills up with all shunis and Michaels and Veneritas and Durans. I mean, it's just getting fuller and fuller. Right? Okay. So again, that doesn't work. There's a lot more to it, a lot more investigation. But really, if you look for this I, it's impossible for it to exist. It appears to exist that way, but it doesn't exist that way. And we had that, we had the examples last night. In everyday life, they're easier to understand kind of analogies and examples of phenomena appearing one way and existing in a different way. The example was the sun rotating around the earth. That's how it appears. It appears as if the sun was rotating around the earth. But it doesn't mean the sun doesn't exist. The sun still exists. It has certain characteristics. It's hot, it's made of fire, it's round, and so forth. So these characteristics, there's no problem with those. But the characteristic of moving around the earth, that doesn't exist. It just appears that way. So likewise, or the example that was given about the wheels of a car. Though they move in one direction, when they move, they appear to move in the opposite direction. Okay? So that the wheels of the car, the tires of the car, they do exist. They have certain characteristics, but the characteristic of moving the opposite way, that is a mistaken appearance. So the same applies to the eye, to the truck, and so forth, to all other objects. They appear to have a certain characteristic. They have all other characteristics. You know, this truck has certain characteristics and they exist, but that one doesn't. That one characteristic doesn't exist. And when we investigate, we can come to see it's impossible. So it's actually not such a big deal. Things appear to us in one way the whole time, but we totally accept that that's impossible. Yeah? Because they're kind of easy to understand. The sun rotating, all right, for many, many centuries, people didn't think it was easy to understand that the earth is moving around the sun. But now it's kind of like, no big deal, I understand that. Still appears that way, but what's the big deal? Okay. So likewise here, it's actually the same thing. It's not such a big deal. It appears that way, but we can nevertheless understand it. But we have to use our own intelligence and really reflect on it. That's the only way. It's like anything. It's like any characteristic that we misperceive. Unless we think about it, give it some thought, how can we come to an understanding that's correct? So reasoning, analysis is considered extremely important because that's the only way to undo it. And we're good at analyzing. We're good at investigating. We might as well use that capacity. Okay. So, doing what I just said, let's investigate it. Is it one or not one? Is there any other possibility? It's not one. Like there's an inherently existent truck that is neither one with its part nor different from its parts. Then what's the other possibility? Is there another possibility? Okay. Alright, so let's say there isn't. And of course, if there was an inherently existent truck, that was also part of the exercise yesterday, well, then if we look at this truck, we would be able to see the entirety, because a truck is made of all these parts. So I would have to be able to see everything. Also, I mean, it also goes into the reasoning, if the truck was one with its parts, I would have to see the entirety. But I never actually see an entire truck. I only just ever see a part of a truck. I see a non-truck when I'm actually precise. I only just see the front, I can't see it. When I see the front, I don't see the back. When I see the side, I don't see the other side. If I see the inside, I don't see the outside. When I see the outside, I don't see the inside. And it applies to everything. I say I see a person, but I only just ever see a part of their body. I don't even see their entire body. I don't see the inside, right? I have no idea what their inner organs look like, right? And if I say, oh, I see an X-ray or you know, like it's not an X-ray, what's it called?
Laser.
Pardon?
Laser?
Oh, with a laser, no, like where you can see the organs in the body, like these machines.
MRI.
Ultrasound, yes. Or MRI, whatever. So anyway, it allows me to see, but that's not the actual organ. I just see a reflection of that. So I can see the inside actually only if I open it up. But then I don't see the outside anymore. Right? Anyway, whatever I do, I only ever just see something that is not the thing itself. Just a part of it. So if the truck was the entirety of its parts, I would have to see the entirety. Okay? So the truck is not half the truck. It's not this side or that side. It's not just one part. So really, if we think about it, it seems to be all these contradictions. The contradictions only exist because we have this misperception of the truck. If we really had an understanding of how the truck exists, it wouldn't be such a big deal that when we see just a part of the truck, we can say we see the truck. It wouldn't be such a big deal. Right now, it seems very contradictory. How's that? Some kind of mind game. Oh, they're trying to deceive me here. But actually, the only reason we see this contradiction is because the truck appears in one way and exists in a different way. Okay? Because we take the inherently existent truck and do the exercises, because we can't identify, we can't separate the truck and the inherently existent truck. The actually existent truck and the inherently existent truck. We don't separate those. And so therefore, the reasonings become really weird. Okay, but having done this exercise of trying to establish how the truck really exists by denying, by refuting that inherent, intrinsic, objective existence, it seems we deny the existence of the truck. Right? So in order to avoid that, we need to establish how does the existent truck actually exist then? If the inherently existent truck isn't there, well, how does the truck exist? If there's no inherently existent I, how do I exist? What is the I? And that is explained by relying on what's called dependent arising. That's what we got to yesterday. So dependence on causes, dependence on parts, and dependence on imputation. Those are the three types of dependent arisings. So if you read through this, I think it becomes a little clear. So dependent arising, this idea that phenomena are dependent and connected on other phenomena, which is why they exist. That's the reason for phenomena to exist. So they don't exist from their own side, they exist in dependence on other things, therefore we can say they exist. So we've covered two levels, but let's just briefly go over them again. Okay, so dependent arising, that is one of the most important concepts in Buddhism, because emptiness is also one of the most important concepts, and they explain each other. Understanding emptiness we get a better understanding of dependent arising. Understanding dependent arising, we get a better understanding of emptiness. So it's like a back and forth. It's basically like trying to get an understanding of emptiness. As I said, it's a slow and gradual process. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of reflection, a lot of analysis. Meditation, basically. Meditation meaning an analytical kind of habituation with this idea. That's the meaning of meditation on emptiness, if you like. So basically, we start off with analytically analyzing or analytically dealing with emptiness. So when we do that, we look first, we always start off with the object of negation, which last night we identified. It's the characteristic that doesn't exist. We identify that, do the reasonings why it can't exist. It's one with its parts is not different and so forth, and deny that. And right away, there's probably a sense, well, if the inherently existent truck doesn't exist, the truck can't exist. Because for us, inherently existent truck and truck are the same. Okay? So we don't perceive an inherently existent truck here and a truck over there. They're like mixed. The appearance is mixed. Alright, if that's the case, therefore, when we now deny the inherently existent truck, the truck stops appearing. Oh, there's no truck. If there's no truck, well then we fall into extreme of nihilism. No truck at all. Truck doesn't exist. So when we fall into extreme of nihilism, we need to reflect on dependent arising. And then when we've done that, we probably have a sense again, oh, the truck is very much dependent, really existent, inherently there. Not as strongly as before, but we may still have that sense again. And then we go back into reflecting on the emptiness. So it's like a back and forth. It's like you're on the balancing beam, trying to find like a healthy balance or a stable balance. You need to go this side, this side, this side. Except on the balance beam, you do it a couple of times and then you're balanced out. Here it takes longer. Okay, but the example works, the analogy works. Okay, so it's like back and forth. So they assist each other. They assist each other, back and forth. You go back and forth, okay, in your perception. And it's like this whole the Karmapa. There's this story of him meditating on emptiness, and he did it so intensely that he came out of the meditation, and his teacher was like, "So, what's happening?" And he said, "There's nothing there. There's nothing there." And then the teacher said, "Go on the balcony, feel the wind in your face. See whether there's nothing there." It wasn't so much dependent arising here, but if you really feel like there's nothing there, but just do this, and there's something there. Okay? Anyway. But dependent arising, so it deals with the fact that phenomena exist because they depend. This truck exists because it depends on, first of all, its causes and conditions. It depends on certain causes that brought it into existence. I exist because there are certain causes, the genetic material of my parents, from a physical point of view, and my previous mind that existed previously in a different form, and now exists in the form that it exists now. So that was the cause. So the mental cause and the physical cause. Those came together, and now I exist as who I am. Okay, so the truck exists because it's dependent on causes and conditions. A sprout. Last night we had the sprout. This is, by the way, a drawing of a sprout for those of you who weren't here. The last picture is kind of like the sprout. Well, I don't know, when do you start talking about a sprout anyway? I mean, when is the exact moment? But anyway, let's just say the last moment is a sprout. But as we've seen yesterday, understanding dependent arising, if we then go back to what's called the ultimate analysis. Okay, so there's two ways of analyzing things. There's an ultimate analysis, okay, and there's a conventional analysis. Okay, so the ultimate analysis means basically looking, how does the truck exactly exist? Trying to exactly posit it. The moment I do this exact, I do inherent existence. I deal with an inherently existent truck. Something that is over there, exactly pointable, something you can exactly pinpoint. The moment I start doing that, it starts disappearing. Okay? So, that is my ultimate analysis. Conventional is just, oh, there's a truck, it's yellow, there's some, it's black up here, it's round. I don't look exactly, I just kind of keep a distance and go, oh, there's a truck. I don't go as close as in like, where exactly is it? Where's the essence? That would right away be ultimate analysis. But since I try to combine the two, that is, I can never do it simultaneously, but I can alternate it. So I've done the ultimate analysis. Is it one with its parts? Is it difference with its parts? Is it one with all of its parts? Right? And already it's disappearing. And then I kind of move back a little bit and go, oh, it exists conventionally. So there's a car, there's a truck. It exists conventionally in the sense that it's dependent on causes and conditions. So like the sprout, it exists because it is arisen from its seed, from the water, from the soil, the warmth, and so forth, the sun. Okay? But if I take that understanding of the seed and now apply ultimate analysis, okay, again the seed starts to disappear, the sprout starts to disappear. I should say. We did that last night. Look at this picture there. So what I wrote down was the causes and conditions that led to the sprout. The last, let's say, is the sprout. Let's say we call that a sprout. Before, maybe we don't call it a sprout, whatever, doesn't matter. So whenever it becomes a sprout, but you can see this continuity of causes. So the little lines, there's supposed to be water, then there's the sun, and there's other conditions that lead to the existence of that sprout. So these are moments in time, right? Moments in time. So if I have these moments in time, every moment in time can be subdivided again into moments, right? You can actually, every moment in time can be divided endlessly. Any temporal part, any moment such as 1 second can be divided again in sub-seconds and again sub-seconds endlessly. There's not a smallest moment in time. Do we agree on that? Yeah. So last night I gave the reason for that, because if we had a smallest moment in time that could not be subdivided, I could not add other moments and come to a continuum in time. What did you call it again?
Collapse.
Oh, they all collapse into one. All these moments in time would collapse into one moment, right? Because usually to have a continuum, you have a former moment that connects with the former moments before, and then you have a latter moment that connects with the latter moments. So that's why it's like if you have a mala, if you had the smallest, like these are the moments in time. If you had the smallest moment, the former moment here, and the latter moment here, they could not connect in the middle, like one side here, the other side there, because if that doesn't have, again, former and latter moments, they will all merge into one. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, so therefore, you can subdivide that moment, even if it's a very small moment, you can subdivide it endlessly. Then the question arises, when is the exact moment that this sprout came into existence? You can't really posit an exact moment, because you could subdivide each moment endlessly. So to really come down, oh, this is the moment when the sprout came into existence, that's impossible. So even though we say, when we use conventional analysis, just looking kind of from afar, oh yes, this sprout came in existence, it exists because it depended on causes and conditions that produced it. Likewise the sprout, yes, the sprout exists because there were causes and conditions that slowly grew into the sprout. But when we look with the ultimate analysis, we start seeing that we can't find that moment it was produced. The moment the sprout was produced, when is the exact moment? It's impossible to find, isn't it? Okay? So again, this understanding of dependence on causes and conditions can help us to understand its ultimate nature. But nevertheless, even though we can't find the exact moment, so ultimately there is no ultimate production, there is no inherent production, an inherent moment in time where an inherent first moment, if we just look back, without ultimate analysis, yes, slowly the seed grew into the sprout. Without much deeper analysis, we can come to see the sprout exists. Okay, so it exists because it depends on causes and conditions. Now, second kind of dependent arising is a little harder to understand. It's dependence on parts. So this sprout, not only does it depend on the causes it led to its existence, not only does this truck depend on causes that led to its existence, on top of it, on top of that, the truck also depends on its parts. The parts that make up the sprout, okay? Make up the truck. So the parts that make this truck, that's what the truck depends on. All right. But again, so just why does the truck exist? Because it has parts. Why does the I exist? Not only because it has causes and conditions. No, it has a mind. There's a mind. There's a body. I say my mind. I say my body. So therefore, I exist. Right? Okay. But again, if I start looking a little bit deeper, if I dig a little bit deeper, this understanding that something exists because it has parts, if I go into the ultimate analysis, I see that these parts can also be divided up endlessly. Okay? That this truck, what it's made of, it's temporal parts that it's made of. It's not just made out of spatial parts. So spatial parts are the parts that occupy space. Right? The right side, the left side, the upper side, the lower side. You know, the windshield of a car, the steering wheel of a car, the tires and so forth. These are the spatial parts. And then you have the temporal parts. Because this truck, there's yesterday's trucks, there's today's truck, there's tomorrow's truck. Right? So it occupies time, time. Not just space, but also time. So these are the two types of parts. Spatial parts and temporary parts. But again, if I start analyzing these parts, I don't come to some kind of, there's no essence there. There's nothing there from its own side, like the smallest particle, the smallest part. Okay, I can divide this into atoms, for example, right? I can divide the parts into smaller parts. Even the small atoms that make the truck, they're the parts of the truck. I can go deeper and deeper. I have the coarser parts, and then I can divide those into left side, right side, upper side, lower side, and go deeper and deeper and take each part and again divide that, and take that part and again divide it, and I can do this endlessly. Do you agree? Endlessly. There's no smallest particle. Because if there was, again, you could not have these tiniest, smallest particles, let's say hypothetically that did exist. If these smallest particles were to exist, they would all collapse into one another. Because you could not have, like, how do you conglomerate parts? How do you make out of a very small part, how do you make something bigger? Right, those parts are kind of lying next to each other. But if there's a smallest particle, it couldn't have a right side and a left side. It could not be divided up any further, like this side here, that side there. And therefore they could not, this particle being added on this side, another particle being added on this side. They would all collapse into one. Does that make sense? That they could not grow any bigger. So therefore, even though it has parts, but these parts really, you cannot exactly pinpoint what is the essential part. What is the essential kind of building block? The one building block that makes it. Because you can actually divide it up endlessly. And as we've seen with the time, you can do that with time too. There's no exact moment in time. There's no exact moment in which this truck exists. There's no exact present. If I say, what is exactly the present moment of this truck? Can't pinpoint that, because every moment can be subdivided. If you don't have a present moment, you don't have a past and a future moment. So you have no moment in time that truck exists, really. Likewise with these parts, where exactly does the truck start and where does it end? It seems to occupy space, but which space exactly? In space, it doesn't actually, to us it seems very clear, the lines where the truck starts and where it ends. But that's just an illusion. Of course, from a particle physicist's point of view, the particles that exactly make up the truck, they keep moving all the time, first of all. Okay, so it seems to be so solidly here, but it's actually moving all the time. On top of that, these particles, you never find an exact boundary of the particle, because you can always divide each particle endlessly. Does that make sense? So when we really look, it seems to be so solidly. To me, the outlines are so clear over there. Very clear. This is where it starts, that's where it ends. But when I look closer, it's just an illusion. It doesn't exactly occupy that space. It doesn't exactly occupy that time. Does that make sense? Okay. So, basically first, just from a conventional point of view, yes, there's a truck dependent on causes and conditions, dependent on parts. Therefore I can say the truck exists. But when I take that understanding and I go deeper, the truck starts disappearing. Okay? It can't be found. Every time I look for that, and when I really look with that ultimate analysis, I don't actually look for a truck. I look for an independently, ultimately, intrinsically existent truck right away. If I just go, oh, truck, if I kind of move away a little bit, all right, I'm just satisfied with something that appears that way, has those parts, and that's it. I never really dig deeper. The moment I dig deeper, I look for something inherently there. That can never be found. Okay. So therefore, we have a sense that there is a truck that truly exists in space and time. But when we take away the spatial parts, when we take away the temporary parts, we don't find it. So not only the parts themselves, we cannot absolutely delineate this is how far the truck goes. This is the moment exactly when the truck exists. Also, we cannot take apart these parts and these temporary parts and spatial parts and end up with a truck. So the truck cannot be found. Do you all get that sense that the truck cannot be found when we start looking for it in that manner? Okay, great. All right, so that takes us then to the deepest level of dependent arising. Again, the question is, how does the truck exist? It exists because it exists on causes and conditions. It exists because it depends on parts. Now, on its subtlest level, the truck exists because it depends on imputation by name and thought. That is the hardest to understand, but that dependent arising, that mode of dependent arising connects in the strongest way with emptiness. It explains why phenomena do not exist inherently in the most effective way. And it's hard to understand. It's very difficult, extremely hard to understand. They say to really realize that level of dependent arising, the dependence on name and thought, to realize that, one needs to realize the emptiness of the phenomenon first. Which means you have to realize that which is easier first, and then you can understand how it actually, that deepest level of dependent arising. So there's a difference in difficulty. It's easier to understand the lack of inherent existence of this truck than understanding that it is merely imputed by name and thought. Okay. And we've basically gone according to this sequence. I've explained the emptiness first, and then I explained the dependent arising. But nevertheless, we do need to alternate them. When we reflect upon it, we reflect on the emptiness, and when I have a feeling nothing exists, I go back to the dependent arising, and back to the emptiness, independent arising, back and forth. Okay. But now I say, well, this truck does not exist inherently from its own side. It only exists because it is imputed, because we give a name truck to this. Okay? It's as easy as that. I mean, on a coarser level, it's actually quite straightforward, but it becomes harder when you go deeper. So this is a truck because I call it a truck. Okay? It's a truck because we call it a truck. Therefore, we can say, as a convention, as a group of people, there's usually people more than just one person involved. So we call this a truck. Therefore, it is a truck. Which explains why I can say I see the truck when actually what I see is just a part of it, because I can impute truck on what is called the basis of imputation. This is very important, this idea of a basis of imputation. Okay? What is the basis of imputation of this truck? It's its tires, it's all the parts that make the truck, right? These are all the parts. That is the basis, and on the basis of that, I say truck. Okay? So any basis, right? It doesn't have to be, I cannot, it's not that I can only say truck when I take all the parts, because otherwise I could not say I see the truck when all I see is a part of it. Okay? On the basis of this is the basis of imputation of truck, so I impute truck, because when I say I see this, I say I see truck. It's okay to say that, because it's merely imputed on that. Another example is when I walk. I say I walk. Actually what walks is my legs. But because I can impute I on my legs, I say I walk. I write a letter, for example. What is writing the letter? Really, what is actually physically writing the letter is the hand. The brain, of course, is responsible. It gives the impulse, it gives the command, the mind, it kind of makes the hand write. But that's just the cause of the writing. The actual writing is the hand doing the action of writing. So I say, I write when my hand writes, because I impute I on my hand. I'm not saying my hand is the I, but the action that the hand performs, I can therefore say I write, because the hand writes. There's nothing separate that writes. Though there's a sense, oh, not only does my hand write, there's also a separate I that also writes. By just sitting still there, possibly. Right?
But when you say my hand writes, it's also you're also imputing and.
Yes, you're imputing my hand. Yeah, you impute everything. Everything is imputed. Everything, right?